3 years ago, I bought a camera on a hunch. Not because it was the fanciest, but because it promised to punch way above its price. That camera is the Sony FX30. After 3 years of real world use, I'm going to tell you what held up, what didn't, and why this little workhorse might still be the best value cinema camera you could buy in 2025. If you're new here, welcome to the channel. My name is Jeff Fagien. I'm a filmmaker, director of photography, and content creator based in South Florida. And on this channel, I talk a lot about tech related to making video content, whether it's cameras, computers, any kind of tech that's used in the life of someone who makes video, I got you covered. So if you're interested in that, make sure to hit the like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos from the channel. Over the years, here's what's kept the FX30 in my bag. Unmatched features for the price. 10-bit 422 internal up to 4K 120. It's compact and flexible. Once I remove this XLR handle, this thing is small enough to do YouTube content, client work, even live streams, all in one super small kit. There is a freelance advantage. Almost everyone in my market shoots Sony that hires on second unit work, so that was seamless. It's reliable for live events. The XLR handle, great autofocus, and easy setup make it a perfect choice. And it's still competitive in 2025. The firmware and feature set haven't aged badly at all. But in 2025, here's why this thing is no longer my daily driver. When compared to my Blackmagic 6K full frame or red Komodo, the internal footage from the FX30 is just not as cinematic. Now, when we shoot ProRes RAW on this thing, like I showed in some of my videos recently, the image can look really cinematic. The problem is you got a crazy crop to shoot in RAW on this camera. It's almost like a micro four thirds size, so 2x of full frame. And on top of that, you got to have an external recorder that sits on top of your camera at all times. So in a lot of cases, I'd rather not have an external recorder sit on top of my camera. I'd rather have the camera be able to record the RAW internally, which both the Blackmagic that I'm shooting on right now and my red Komodo can. When it comes to battery life, the internal battery of the FX30 is pretty decent. I get over an hour runtime. Now, when I need longer runtime, I typically hook up a V-mount or some kind of power bank from Anker via the camera's USB-C, and then I'm able to go all day. I typically just get a really long USB-C cord at that point because I don't want to have a huge rig attached to the FX30 most of the time, and the long cable lets me just leave the power bank on the floor or somewhere out of the way, and it keeps the overall setup really small. But again, I have no complaints about the internal battery. It's just for certain shoots, especially covering music performances, anything that is of a longer duration than an hour, you will need external power or to have multiple batteries if you can turn on and off the camera. So let's talk about media for a second. When I first got the FX30, I was using V90 SD cards out of convenience. I already owned a few, and on top of that, I can use it in computers that had built-in SD card slots, and it just made things a lot easier. And then I stumbled across to CF Express card type A, and I've been using B for a little bit in the Blackmagic cameras, and I noticed the offload speeds were pretty quick, and that has been the huge benefit with moving to CF Express type A, to the point where I'm now only using CF Express type A with the FX30, because the offload speeds are so much faster that it does make a difference when in the field doing file transfers. So if you care about that kind of stuff, would totally recommend using CF Express type A. But for convenience and in some cases for cost, because you don't have to use V90 SD cards, although anything lower than V90, you're not going to be able to do every single shooting mode on the FX30. You can use V60, you can even use V30, but the lower you go, the less you're going to be able to do in the camera. So do keep that in mind. For vlogging outdoors, the Osmo Pocket 3 now gives me similar quality in a fraction of the size. When I first bought the FX30, I would have this thing stripped down without the cage, without the XLR handle, with just a wireless receiver for audio on top and the small Sony 11mm on the front, and I would have it on a super small gimbal. And at the time, it was amazing for vlog footage. I was getting insane shots, keeping everything in a super small backpack, and my footage was stabilized on a gimbal, so it all looked fantastic. But then when the Osmo Pocket 3 came out, it gave me very similar quality in a package that I could literally fit in my pocket. And I then stopped using the FX30 for vlogging, which wasn't quite 50% of the reason I bought this camera for, but it was a big reason because at the time it was the first Super 35 10-bit camera that Sony had. Now we have cameras like the Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, even the A6700 that do have a crop sensor and shoot 10-bit and are a little bit smaller than this camera. So in certain situations like vlogging, they are a little bit of a better choice at this point in time in 2025. And that all reminds me of, when I first got this camera, I got it because of how small you can get this if you used Super 35 or APS-C lenses from both Sony, Sigma, or some of the other third-party manufacturers. You can just get incredible quality out of this thing in an incredibly small package. Where now there are just smaller cameras out there that I didn't see coming in 2022, and they didn't exist in 2022 either. So now it gives me a reason to use those more instead of this camera. The FX30 now almost sits in an almost too big, almost too small zone for what I personally need it for. Here's how I used it day to day. 90% of my footage is in 4K 24. I rarely use 60 frames per second, and I only use 120 frames per second for action sports. I heavily use the 11mm for vlogging early on. I also use the 11mm as a studio lens specific times of the year where I needed to film, like for instance in this angle where I needed the camera even closer to me, and it just gave me a wider field of view and made the camera be able to sit on my desk. Now I've kind of worked it out where I'm using a full frame 24mm and the camera's further back, and I've been able to make it work, but I obviously see less of the room even with this 24mm on full frame, where with the 11mm I had it closer to me and I could see the entire room, including this painting right here. It was a great field of view. On top of that, the colors using the Sony 11mm with the FX30 were fantastic. I actually liked the colors on that lens more than I like the colors we get on some of the Sigma lenses for the Sony E-mount. But, it is a Sony lens when you're looking at the 11mm, so it does kind of make sense. I've done tons of videos over the years on the FX30, from videos about the camera, tutorials, so I'll make sure to leave a link in the description below, because videos like the 4K 120 mode and how to expose for it have helped a lot of users, and so if you're looking to pick up this camera, definitely make sure to look at some of those videos, because it will definitely help you out when using this camera. So that all being said, in 2025, how am I using this camera? Well, today I'm using it mostly as my indoor podcast camera. For high-end jobs, I'm still using either my Blackmagic or Red, and for vlogging, I'm using the Osmo Pocket 3. Now, I pretty much bring my FX30 with me to all of these events because it's great to have a backup camera. And on narrative gigs, I've used this as like a C or a D camera, and the footage has been fine. I've been able, with a colorist, to be able to match it, but I've never really used this as an A camera on any narrative project I've ever worked on. It's just not quite up to the image quality as some of the other cameras we're using, so it just didn't really make sense. Plus, again, it doesn't have internal RAW, and all the other cameras I've been using on narrative production are shooting internal RAW. So that all being said, I'm kind of at a crossroads now, because the FX30 was the camera that really got me to start purchasing Sony. When I first bought the FX30 in 2022, at that point I had the Red Komodo, some Blackmagic cameras, a Canon R7, and a Canon R6. And I really liked the image quality I was getting out of the Canon cameras, but there was a lot of functionality problems with those cameras, especially when trying to do stuff out of the HDMI, and Sony just didn't have those issues. I didn't move to Sony at the time because I didn't have many full frame lenses, and the ones I did were just Canon RF full frame lenses. Most of what I had was Super 35, and I just wasn't interested in picking up Sony full frame. But when the FX30 was announced, I picked it up because it was Super 35 and I could use my existing Sigma and Super 35 lenses with the Sigma MC11 adapter. And it worked great when I first got the camera, and even got me to buy Sony lenses that were cropped for the FX30. And eventually I even bought full frame Sony cameras like the Sony a7 IV. And for a little bit over a year, I was a complete Sony shooter. I sold all my Blackmagic cameras, I sold my Canon cameras, I had even sold my Red Komodo and went all Sony for a little over a year. But during that year, I really missed the image quality from my Red camera and the Blackmagic cameras. But that all brings me to the point of why a lot of people, including myself, shot on Sony. It's not necessarily about the image quality. It's about the usability and the features. Sony, for the past few years, has had the cameras that give you the best value for the money when it comes to features, usability, and then I would put image quality below that. It's not that their image quality was bad. It's definitely better than it was, especially 10 years ago when I just refused to shoot on Sony. But there are cameras with better image quality out there. But sometimes, having a camera that just works in the field a lot faster, you could just get up, get going, start shooting, that makes a bigger difference and is a lot more important to people than a camera with great image quality. It's part of the reason why I don't use my Blackmagic for every shoot. It's part of the reason I don't use my Red for every shoot. Those cameras have a lot of usability issues that the Sony cameras just don't have. Now, Canon is starting to get better with that. They just came out with the C50, and now I'm at a crossroads to whether I keep this FX30 because this is now the last Sony camera I have, but I got a lot of accessories, a lot of lenses for it, and I still have a lot of Canon lenses. And so I'm heavily considering, once I get the C50 in, because I pre-ordered it, potentially selling the FX30 and using it to pay for the C50, some of the accessories, to pay for lenses. I know this is a much cheaper camera than the C50, but it's very similar in certain ways for sure. And I haven't made my decision yet. Who knows? I may end up just keeping it and selling off some of my Sony accessories and keeping it as a backup camera, or here in the studio as I use my Blackmagic more in the field. I haven't really made a full decision yet, but we're at the point now where Sony's still a great, solid choice as a company. Everything I mentioned in today's video still stands today. It's just they do have a lot more competition here in 2025 than they did in 2022. I don't regret a second with the FX30. And for anyone who's looking for a camera that's around $2,000, it's still pretty much unmatched. I know that Nikon came out with the ZR and a lot of people are excited with that, but from what I'm seeing, there are a lot of compromises with that camera as well, so it's not the perfect choice for everybody. And then the only real competitor I see with the FX30 as far as spec for spec is kind of the Canon R50V, but that camera is a lot cheaper. The image quality just isn't quite as good as even the FX30. So if you're building a serious video kit under $3,000, the FX30 is still one of the top picks for combining features, flexibility, and integration into a cinematic workflow. If you demand the absolute highest image quality or ultra small rigs, you may want to look at other options. But for long-term value, the FX30 still remains a workhorse in 2025. So this is my 3 years long-term review on the Sony FX30. This camera has done a lot of amazing work for my career and for friends of mine who couldn't necessarily afford the higher end cameras, but could just get in on a kit like the Sony FX30, a Sigma 18-50, and just get going. I mean, I know I didn't really cover pictures and photos in today's video, but I've used this camera to do photos. It does an okay job, and paired with the 18-50, it's been a great hobby camera on vacation to be able to just take some decent photos. So if you got knowledge and value out of today's video, please make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and notification bell to keep up to date with the latest videos on the channel. And until next time, my name is Jeff Fagien. Thank you for joining me as always, and I will catch you in the next video.